ευχαριστήσω για την παρουσία σας στην πραγματικά πάρα πολύ σημαντική αυτή ημερίδα, η οποία μας δίνει την ευκαιρία να έχουμε μια προβληματική και μια ανάπτυξη επιχειρηματολογίας για ένα εξαιρετικά σημαντικό θέμα που απορρέει συνήθως όταν οι σχέσεις δύο ενηλίκων πάβουν να λειτουργούν και καταλήγουν στο διαζύγιο, και σε ορισμένες περιπτώσεις έχω την εντύπωση ότι αυτό γίνεται συχνότερα. Δυστυχώς, οι σχέσεις των δύο ενηλίκων είναι τόσο κακές που το παιδί χρησιμοποιείται σαν ένα εργαλείο στο οποίο ο ένας προσπαθεί να προξενήσει πόνο στον άλλο. Και αυτή η τραγωδία, βεβαίως, το τελικό αποτέλεσμα, αυτός που τρώει το περισσότερο χτύπημα, είναι το εργαλείο αυτό το οποίο χρησιμοποιείται, και το παιδί μεγαλώνοντας αδιαμφισβήτητα πια ξέρουμε ότι έχει τεράστια προβλήματα και έχει συχνές επαφές και με ψυχιάτρους και με ποινικά ζητήματα, όπως αναρωτήθηκαν και οι προηγούμενοι ομιλητές.
Well, good afternoon. It's really my pleasure to be with you today, at least, not in person, but I'm very glad I had the opportunity to speak to you about this topic of parental alienation as a form of child abuse. I'm wondering, am I coming through clearly, and whether you can hear me clearly? It seems so. Okay, so I'll just adjust my the lighting here a little bit. So if I could ask you to just advance the PowerPoint slide to the next slide, please. Okay, so you can see my agenda today will be looking at identification of parental alienation, as well as defining what is parental alienation as a form of child abuse, looking at responses in the way of intervention and prevention. The first point I'd like to make is that parental alienation is really a type of pathological estrangement between a parent and child. It's a pathological alienation in which children are forced to distance themselves from one of their parents by the other parent, often to the point of developing extreme feelings of hostility in situations where there is no history of violence, abuse, or neglect by the alienated parent. I'll also be referring to the alienated parent as the target parent. In these situations, children are essentially robbed of the love and care of one of their parents in their lives. We're not talking about situations in which there's been abuse or neglect of a child and the parent has caused his or her own estrangement in the child's life. I just wanted to say a few words about myself. I'm a social work professor from Vancouver, Canada, specializing in child and family policy and practice, with most of the focus of my work focusing on children and family members most negatively affected by divorce, especially those who lose contact with each other. I've been studying parental alienation since 1985. At that point, I undertook a PhD research on the experiences of divorced fathers and why so many of these men eventually lose contact with their children after divorce. The term parental alienation in 1985 was not yet in use. I used the most neutral term I could find to describe this phenomenon, which was parental disengagement. I hypothesized and assumed that most fathers who lose contact with their children did so of their own choosing. But I found absolutely that the opposite result, that in fact this was not the case. I found that most fathers, divorced fathers, suffer a severe grief reaction connected to the absence of their children from their lives, and that the stereotypes of divorced dads do not correspond to the experiences described by fathers themselves. Now, since my first study of non-custodial fathers, I've conducted studies of disengaged and alienated grandparents. I've done a study of alienated mothers. Over the years, I've interviewed over 200 parents and extended family members in depth. I've also studied the perspectives of lawyers, mediators, and mental health professionals. I've learned a lot from those who are the most directly affected, and those are children and parents themselves, about what parental alienation is and how it affects children and families. So first of all, I'll begin with what is parental alienation exactly? Again, parental alienation is not the result of abuse or neglect. It's not the result of behaviors that a parent does to damage their relationship with a child. Rather, parental alienation is essentially a child's reluctance or refusal to have a relationship with a parent for illogical, untrue, or exaggerated reasons. It's essentially unjustified rejection of a parent. Now, I think it's important to note that most children who reject their parents for good reasons, for reasons related to abuse or neglect, or disinterest by the parent, have feelings of ambivalence. Not only do they have mixed feelings and have somewhat ambivalent feelings, but the feelings they have are quite strong. On the one hand, they have strong anger. On the other hand, they would like to see things improve. They would like the situation to be better. Alienated children, however, have no such feelings. They experience no ambivalence. They're polarized. They see things in black and white. One parent is absolutely perfect, flawless. The other is basically the devil, is demonized. They state vehemently, but matter-of-factly, that they want nothing to do with that parent. They display a lack of emotion. So the result of parental alienation is at best a diminished relationship and at worst a destroyed relationship. The child distances him or herself. The child emotionally rejects the target parent, and at the same time loses, in fact, someone who is actually a capable and loving parent who wants to be an active parent in their life. Now, parental alienation then is not caused by the alienated or the target parent, but by the alienating parent who is displaying, in fact, a severe pathology. So first and foremost, parental alienation is pathological alienation. And this is actually recognized by international clinical and diagnostical associations, professional bodies, and diagnostic manuals, such as the DSM-5, which describes parental alienation essentially in its description of the diagnostic code child psychological abuse, which leads to long-term traumatic psychological and physical effects in childhood, and later also in adulthood. The World Health Organization International Classification of Diseases includes parental alienation as a pathological type of caregiver-child relationship problem. Now, when it comes to definitions out there, in a recent publication in Psychological Bulletin, Jennifer Harman and I defined parental alienation in this way. Parental alienation is the programming of a child by one parent to denigrate the other target parent in an effort to harm, damage, and destroy the relationship between a child and the target parent, whereby the target parent is demonized and undermined as a parent worthy of the child's love and attention. Parental alienation commonly refers to a child who's been influenced to reject, to hate one parent by the other parent, And also, parental alienation refers to the behaviors, the parental behaviors, that poison the child's relationship with the other parent. This denigration campaign by the alienating parent results in the child's own unjustified rejection of the target parent. So for the child, parental alienation is a serious mental condition based on a false belief that the alienated parent is unworthy to be a parent. Now, parental alienation lies on a continuum from mild to severe, and we find alienated parents who have contact with their children, but many who have absolutely no contact. Parental alienation can be reciprocal, meaning that both parents engage in it, but more often it's non-reciprocal. More than any other form of family violence, it is most often non-reciprocal form of abuse. In some cases, children and parents reunite or reconcile. In other cases, they never reunite or reconcile. Parental alienation most commonly occurs in the context of child custody disputes after parents divorce. There are no gender differences in regards to who are the perpetrators and who are the victims of parental alienation, but custodial status is a key factor because significantly more non-custodial parents fall victim to parental alienation. And finally, parental alienation is far more common than we assume. For many years, it's been estimated that parental alienation affects about 1% of all children. But again, Harman's research found a staggering rate of over 13% of US parents reporting that they had been victimized by parental alienation at some point in their lives. If I can advance to the next two slides. So parental alienation as child abuse basically has two elements. One is pathological behavior of the alienating parent, and the other is pathological reaction of the child. So the two core elements of parental alienation correspond to the two components of child abuse, the two main components of the definition of child abuse. The first is child abuse and parental alienation are basically the result of human action. The source of the abuse is attributable to human agency, one parent denigrating the other parent or erasing the other parent from the child's life. The second element of parental alienation and child abuse is that they represent serious and significant forms of harm and pose a threat to the well-being of a child. If we could move to slide number 5. Parental alienation involves a set of abusive strategies on the part of a parent to foster the child's rejection of the other parent, whereby children are manipulated by one parent to reject the other. In addition, parental alienation is the child's unjustified campaign of denigration against a parent in which children's views of the target parent are almost exclusively negative to the point where the parent is demonized. For the child, parental alienation is a serious mental condition, a serious mental disturbance based on that false belief that the alienated parent is dangerous and unworthy to be a parent, resulting in the psychological and physical well-being of a child being negatively affected. Now, research on the identification and assessment of parental alienation is much stronger than we assume. There's consensus in regard to the core components of alienation. There are now over 1,200 books and journal articles on the topic of parental alienation. In particular, research on the abusive strategies of alienating parent is very widespread. It includes both empirical and clinical data. Probably the researcher who has done the most work in this area is Amy Baker. And the next slide, slide number 6, lists the 17 strategies of alienating parents that Baker identifies in her work. I won't go through these. I'll just let you kind of have a very quick glance at the slide, ranging from bad-mouthing to limiting contact, all the way down the list to cultivating dependency and undermining the authority of the target parent. Now, moving on to the next slide. Before we do that, I just wanted to note in relation to these 17 strategies that Baker identifies of alienating parents, each of these strategies, if you look at this list of 17, they serve a number of functions. The first function is to strengthen the cohesion, the child's cohesion and alignment with the alienating parent. The second function is to create psychological distance between the child and the target parent. The third is to intensify the target parent's anger and hurt over the child's behavior. And finally, to incite conflict between the child and the target parent should the target parent challenge or react to the child's behavior. Now, moving on to the next slide, my own research has examined the experiences of more severely alienated parents and children, as most of Baker's work really looks at less extreme forms of alienation. But I've mostly been interested in parents who are forcibly removed from the lives of their child. There's been much less research done on severe alienation. It's a situation where the parent-child relationship is completely broken. The kinds of behaviors we see here are much more serious forms of abuse and reflect a much greater degree of pathology on the part of the alienating parent. The issue of parental alienation, in my own work, interviewing parents who are affected, the parental alienation was identified by parents as their primary issue of concern in their experience of separation. They describe alienation as a form of emotional child abuse, often connected to other forms of abuse like physical violence and child neglect. They describe parental alienation in terms of both individual and collective abuse, and I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. And in their accounts of parental alienation as a form of child abuse, they focused on these two main elements: the behavior of the alienating parent and the effects of the alienation on the child and on themselves. And this next slide lists the indicators of extreme parental alienation: behavior of alienating parents, from seizing the child by force and denying all access, a sense of entitlement in doing so, a lack of attunement to children's needs, the fact that conflict and strong feelings of antipathy don't abate over time, etc. Now, moving on to the next slide, another focus of parental alienation research is on the impact of parental alienation on children. And here we have both clinical and clinical accounts and empirical research. We know a lot. We have a lot of research on severely alienated children, and I've grouped the effects under 5 main themes. First of all is this theme of self-hatred. It's particularly disturbing among children. And I guess the key point here is that teaching hatred of the other parent is really essentially teaching the child to hate him or herself. It's instilling self-hatred in the child. Children internalize the hatred targeted toward the alienated parent. They're led to believe that the target parent did not love them, didn't want them. At the same time, they experience severe guilt related to betraying the alienated parent. Their self-hatred and depression is rooted in feelings of being unloved by one of their parents. They're hurt just by the mere fact of separation from that parent. At the same time, they're denied the opportunity to mourn the loss of that parent or even to talk about that parent. Second, alienated children exhibit severe psychosocial disturbances. Their social skills are lacking. These include, so that their social emotional development is disrupted. They display a lack of trust in relationships, a lot of social anxiety, in many cases, social isolation. They have poor relationships not only with peers, but with both of their parents. As adults, they tend to enter partnerships earlier. They're more likely to divorce or dissolve their cohabiting unions. They're more likely to have children outside a partnership. They're more likely to become themselves alienated from their own children. Thirdly, life skills are lacking in alienated children. Low self-sufficiency, lack of autonomy, and a lingering dependence on the alienating parent are characteristic of alienated children. And we see this is manifested through phenomena such as adultification, where the alienating parent treats the child as an adult and confides very adult and personal information to the child as like an adult. There's a phenomenon of parentification, where the child takes responsibility for the parent, for the alienating parent, essentially, a reversal of roles. And at the same time, strangely, in kind of a phenomenon of being infantilized, this folie à deux relationship that develops that renders the child incompetent and incapable of the life tasks of adulthood. Fourthly, alienated children are more likely to underperform in school. They're less likely to attain academic and professional qualifications in adulthood. They're more likely to have low incomes and experience unemployment. And finally, alienated children experience difficulties controlling their impulses. They struggle with mental health and addiction problems. Parents report that their children, alienated children, are more likely to smoke, drink alcohol, abuse drugs, and succumb to behavioral addictions, more likely to be promiscuous, and foregoing contraception, becoming teenage parents. And before I move into the last phase of my presentation, I just wanted to mention a couple of studies that I think are very relevant to understanding parental alienation. One is a study by Sarah McClanahan. She led a joint University of California, Berkeley, Princeton University, and Cornell University study on the causal effects of father absence. Now, paternal alienation is much more widely studied than maternal alienation. They basically concluded that children's physical and mental health problems are not only correlated with parental alienation, but they're caused by parental alienation. And then a recent meta-analysis study here in Canada by Amandine Bode, Jessica Pearson, and Sylvie Drapeau from Laval University looked at the causes of parental alienation. They came up with a very interesting finding that parental alienation is least likely to occur in jurisdictions that have legislated shared parenting or even more equal parenting. Parents who are in equal parenting arrangements are least likely to alienate their children. So that kind of leads me to my final thoughts on intervention and prevention, and I'd like to go to the intervention slide. As far as interventions to address parental alienation are concerned, given the complexity and severity of more extreme alienation, there's a fair bit of agreement in the clinical literature that we need to take a multifaceted approach to addressing and combating parental alienation, with two major directions for intervention. The first are family reunification programs and therapeutic services for alienated parents and children. Children show the best adjustment to divorce when they have meaningful relationships with both parents. In parental alienation situations, it's vital to restore children's relationships with their alienated parent in a timely and very considered manner. Reunification programs should be undertaken with service providers with specialized expertise in parental alienation and parental alienation reunification. Further, the trauma of alienation is severe, and therapeutic services to individual victims of alienation are urgently needed for successful reunification. In addition, divorce education programs, therapeutic family mediation, post-divorce family therapy, and parenting coordination and coaching services are other ways to address the issue of parental alienation. Secondly, we need professional recognition of parental alienation as a serious form of individual child abuse. It's the result of actions by an individual caregiver that represent a significant form of harm to children. It's really a form of abuse writ large. It's trauma writ large for children that warrants the involvement of child protection authorities. Recognizing parental alienation as a form of emotional child abuse, which is also linked to child neglect and to physical and sexual abuse, it clearly makes it, above all else, a child protection concern. Now, the range of responses by child protection authorities are quite broad. They range from
Professor Crook, I would ask you to accentuate. You have few minutes to consider.
They involve family support services aimed at educating the parent about the effects of alienation, the unacceptability of alienation, and at the same time affecting a reunification process between the child and the targeted parent. And finally, I'd like to move to the last slide on prevention. As far as prevention of parental alienation is concerned, the first step is a major reform of the family law system, establishing shared or equal parenting as the foundation of family law. We know that parental alienation thrives in an adversarial, winner-take-all legal system where parents are almost forced to criticize, to denigrate, invalidate the other parent. It also flourishes, parental alienation flourishes in situations where one parent has exclusive care and control of a child. Legal systems that remove a parent from a child's life by means of sole custody or primary residence orders are not only contributing to parental alienation, they're in fact engaging in a form of parental alienation. They're engaging in a form of collective child abuse. So Jep Zander's research concludes that parental alienation is first and foremost not just a form of individual child abuse, but a form of collective child abuse, a systemic problem. And also that parental alienation is least likely to occur in jurisdictions that have legislated shared parenting as the foundation of family law. And finally, there is the enforcement, the issue of enforcement. effective legal enforcement of shared parenting orders, and legal consequences for parents who withhold children from the other parent, who alienate their children from the other parent. We need law enforcement to ensure compliance with shared parenting orders, as well as consequences for engaging in parental alienating behaviors. Now, enforcement is perhaps the most contentious step, and different approaches have been suggested by professionals, ranging from incarceration to custody reversal to family therapy to just leaving the situation alone. Some people argue that continued exposure to the alienating parent will be counterproductive to reunification. Others suggest that using alienation from to punish or deter alienation seems somehow counterintuitive. However, the most recent research indicates that therapeutic interventions are most effective when there are strong legal sanctions for non-compliance with shared parenting orders. And there's an emerging consensus among alienation specialists that awarding primary parental responsibility to the target parent when parental alienation is severe is an important step in the reunification process and in ameliorating parental alienation situations. So in conclusion, the present state of knowledge about parental alienation has really advanced with an explosion of research over the past 10 years, with now there being over 1,200 research and clinical studies reported in scientific and professional journals, books, and book chapters. The research is very strong in regard to the definition and characteristics of parental alienation. We have a lot of more information now about prevalence and incidence rates, and we know a lot about the strategies and behaviors of alienating parents, and we know a lot about the effects of parental alienation on child well-being. All of these clearly point to the fact that parental alienation is a serious form of emotional child abuse. It's also pointing to the fact that we really need to take action, urgent action. Our main challenge is to overcome professional and political misunderstanding of parental alienation and political inaction on the issue. We need a multi-pronged, multifaceted approach to prevention and intervention. The 4 steps I've just outlined: professional recognition of parental alienation as a form of serious child abuse, and corresponding intervention of child protection authorities on the one hand. Secondly, a fundamental reform of the family law system, establishing shared parenting as the foundation of family law. Thirdly, the provision of effective treatment programs and services by trained service providers, including reunification services and prevention programs. And finally, effective legal enforcement of shared parenting orders and legal consequences for parents who withhold children from the other parent. This provides us a framework. It provides us with a framework and represents a call to action for alienated parents and their allies. And I'll stop there because I think I heard a signal that time is up. So thank you for your attention, and I guess